They were not a failed experiment. They were not simple brutes. Neanderthals were a success. They survived in the harshest of Ice Age landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years. They controlled fire, they made complex tools, they hunted mammoths and woolly rhinos. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers. They cared for their sick and elderly. We know this from skeletons of old Neanderthals with healed fractures and crippling arthritis. Someone had to have fed them, protected them. They had culture. They had families. They were people, and then they were gone. Around 40,000 years ago, after a reign that lasted longer than our own species has been around, they vanished from the fossil record. Their disappearance is one of the biggest mysteries in human evolution. It's a cold case, tens of thousands of years old, with no witnesses left to question. For decades, we've sifted through the evidence, looking for the culprit. The clues are sparse. A collection of bones, a scattering of stone tools, and the faint chemical whispers left in cave floor sediments. The list of suspects is long. The most obvious one is us. Homo sapiens, modern humans. Our ancestors began to trickle out of Africa and into the Middle East and then into Europe right around the time the Neanderthals started to decline. It seems too much of a coincidence. So the first theory was simple: we killed them. Maybe through direct violence, warfare over territory and resources, or maybe we just outcompeted them. Perhaps our brains were wired a bit differently. We had more complex language, larger social networks, better technology like throwing spears and sewing needles. We could adapt faster, breed faster, and simply squeeze them out of existence. Another major suspect is climate. The world the Neanderthals lived in was not stable. It was a roller coaster of extreme cold and brief warm spells. The ice sheets advanced and retreated. Forests became tundra, and tundra became ice. These rapid shifts would have been incredibly stressful. The animal herds they relied on would have moved or died out. Plant resources would have vanished. Maybe their populations, always small and scattered, were just stretched too thin. They fractured into smaller and smaller groups, unable to find mates, and eventually they just faded away. Then there's the idea that they never really disappeared at all. Not completely. We know from our own DNA that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. Most people of non-African descent today carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genome. So maybe they were just absorbed. Their populations were so small compared to the wave of incoming modern humans that they were genetically swamped. They became part of us. All of these theories have merit. All of them likely played a part. The world is rarely simple. Extinctions are usually messy, complicated affairs with many contributing factors. But what if there was another accomplice, a silent, invisible killer that tipped the scales? What if the story of the Neanderthals' end is not just about spears and ice, but about germs? Could a prehistoric pandemic, or a series of them, have been the final blow that pushed them over the edge? The idea is both simple and terrifyingly plausible. It's a story that has played out again and again throughout human history. When a new population meets an isolated native one, the newcomers bring more than just their tools and their languages. They bring their diseases. The native population, having never been exposed to these specific pathogens, has no built-up immunity. The results are catastrophic. The most famous example is the arrival of Europeans in the Americas. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other diseases brought by the Spanish and other colonists swept through the Aztec and Inca empires and the tribes of North America. These sicknesses killed far more people than swords or guns ever did. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas died from Old World diseases. It was an apocalypse, an unintentional but utterly devastating biological assault. Could something similar have happened 40,000 years earlier? Let's set the stage. Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. Neanderthals evolved in Eurasia. For hundreds of thousands of years, these two human populations were largely separate. They adapted to their own environments and, just as importantly, to their own local diseases. Africa is a tropical continent. It has an immense diversity of microbes, parasites, and viruses. The humans who lived there were in a constant evolutionary arms race with these pathogens. Over millennia, their immune systems developed defenses. They carried a whole host of germs that they had learned to live with. To a modern human from Africa, a particular bacteria might cause a mild stomach ache or no symptoms at all. Neanderthals living in the colder, less microbially dense environment of Ice Age Europe would have faced a different set of challenges. Their immune systems would have been perfectly tuned to the pathogens of their world, but they would have been completely naive to the tropical diseases our ancestors carried. They would have had no history with them, no inherited resistance. So imagine a small group of Homo sapiens moving into a valley in what is now France. They carry the microbes of their African homeland. They might not even be sick themselves. They are just carriers. They set up camp near a river. A Neanderthal group lives upstream. They drink from the same water. Or perhaps they trade. Or maybe they fight. Or maybe, as we know happened, they have sex. All it takes is one point of contact. A shared piece of food. A drop of saliva. A touch. A modern human might have been carrying something like Helicobacter pylori, a bacterium that lives in the stomach. In many people today, it causes no problems. In others, it can cause ulcers or stomach cancer. Genetic studies have shown that modern humans and Neanderthals had different strains of this bacterium. The strain our ancestors brought out of Africa might have been far more virulent to a Neanderthal stomach that had never encountered it before. Or consider a virus, something like the herpes simplex virus. There are different types. One type, HSV2, which causes genital herpes, seems to have been passed from an unknown hominin species in Africa to our ancestors around 1.6 million years ago. Neanderthals show no sign of having had it. When modern humans and Neanderthals met, this virus could have crossed the species barrier. For a population with no prior exposure, a virus that is merely an unpleasant nuisance for us could have been a deadly plague. It doesn't even have to be an exotic tropical disease, it could be the ancient equivalent of the common cold or the flu. These everyday illnesses can be dangerous even for us. For a population with a completely unprimed immune system, they could have been lethal, spreading like wildfire through a small Neanderthal clan. The way Neanderthals lived might have made them especially vulnerable. They lived in small, isolated groups. This is usually a good defense against pandemics. If one group gets sick and dies out, the disease dies with them. It can't easily jump to the next group over the mountains, but this isolation also meant their gene pool was small. They had very low genetic diversity compared to the Homo sapiens populations in Africa. Low genetic diversity is a huge problem when it comes to disease. The immune system relies on a wide variety of genes, particularly a set called the HLA complex, to recognize and fight off pathogens. The more diverse your HLA genes are, the more pathogens your population can handle. If everyone has a similar immune system, one successful virus or bacterium can wipe everyone out. The Neanderthals' low diversity meant they had fewer genetic tools in their immune toolkit. They were a sitting duck for a novel pathogen, so the scenario looks like this. It's not one single pandemic that sweeps across Europe in a year, it's more like a slow-burning fire. As a disease is introduced to one Neanderthal group, it spreads. Maybe it kills half of them. The survivors are weakened, they can't hunt as effectively, they can't care for their children. Their birth rates drop. The group becomes fragile. Another new disease, brought in by another wave of modern humans a generation later, hits the same group. This time, it finishes them off. This process, repeated over and over again across thousands of years and across the entire continent, is what scholars call the leaky frontier model. There wasn't a hard border between Neanderthal and modern human territory. It was a shifting, porous zone of contact. In this zone, genes were exchanged, and so were germs, and the flow of germs was likely very one-sided. We, the invaders from the microbially rich tropics, were giving them far more than we were getting. This theory is compelling. It fits with what we know about biology and history. But is there any direct evidence? This is where it gets tricky. Germs, especially viruses, don't fossilize. You can't find a smallpox virus on a 40,000-year-old bone. For a long time, the disease theory was just a good story. It was pure speculation. But in the last couple of decades, something incredible has happened. We learned to read ancient DNA. The work of scientists like Svante Pabo, who won a Nobel Prize for sequencing the Neanderthal genome, has opened up a whole new window into the past. We can now extract tiny, fragmented strands of DNA from ancient bones and teeth and piece them back together. And this doesn't just apply to Neanderthal DNA, it applies to the DNA of the microbes that lived inside them. Scientists can now go looking for the genetic ghosts of ancient pathogens. It's painstaking work, but it has yielded results. Researchers have found the DNA of the bacterium that causes tuberculosis in the bones of a 17,000-year-old bison. They have found the plague bacterium Yersinia pestis in the teeth of Bronze Age humans. And in the stomach of Otzi the Iceman, a 5,300-year-old mummy found in the Alps, they found the DNA of Helicobacter pylori. This technology has been applied to the Neanderthal question. A few years ago, a study looked at the DNA found in the calcified plaque on Neanderthal teeth from caves in Spain and Belgium. This dental plaque, or tartar, is a gold mine. It's a mineralized graveyard of everything that was in the Neanderthals' mouth, bits of food, bacteria, and maybe even viruses. The study found the DNA of dozens of species of microbes. It showed that Neanderthals in Belgium ate woolly rhino and wild sheep, while those in Spain ate moss, mushrooms, and pine nuts. It was a fascinating glimpse into their diet. More importantly, it showed that this kind of research is possible. We can find the DNA of their microbiome, and if we can find the DNA of their normal, everyday bacteria, we might eventually find the DNA of a killer pathogen. The human and Neanderthal genomes themselves also hold clues. By comparing our DNA to theirs, we can see the history of our immune systems. We can see which immune system genes we share and which are different. Interestingly, some of the Neanderthal DNA that many modern humans carry is related to the immune system. When our ancestors arrived in Europe, they interbred with Neanderthals. This was a quick way to pick up immune system genes that were already adapted to the local European pathogens. It was a genetic shortcut. But this exchange was a two-way street. While we were picking up their useful immune genes, we were also likely handing over our own set of diseases. Our genome tells a story of a long, brutal war with African pathogens. We carry the genetic scars and weapons from that war. The Neanderthal genome tells a different story, one of an adaptation to a different microbial world. When those two worlds collided, the Neanderthals were at a severe disadvantage. Their immune systems were facing an enemy they had never seen before. Think of it like two armies. The Neanderthals had an army that was perfectly trained and equipped to fight on one specific type of terrain. The modern humans arrived with a different kind of army, one that had been fighting a multitude of enemies on all sorts of terrain for generations. When they met, the Neanderthal army was simply unprepared for the new tactics, new weapons, and overwhelming numbers of the modern human microbial force. So, where does this leave us? The pandemic theory is no longer just speculation. It's a scientifically plausible hypothesis with growing, albeit indirect, evidence. It doesn't replace the other theories. It complements them. It weaves them together into a more complete and tragic story. Let's imagine that story. It's 45,000 years ago. Neanderthal populations are already in trouble. The climate is getting colder and more unstable. The great herds of mammoths and bison are becoming less predictable. The Neanderthals living in their small family groups are finding it harder to get by. Their numbers are slowly dwindling. Then, new people arrive. They are taller, leaner. They have different tools, they hunt the same animals and gather the same plants. The pressure increases. Now, there is competition for the best caves, the best hunting grounds, the best flint sources. There might be some violence, a skirmish over a kill, but mostly the two groups try to avoid each other. But they can't avoid each other completely. A curious teenager from one group ventures too close to the other's camp. A hunting party tracks a wounded deer into the other's territory, and sometimes they meet peacefully. Maybe they even trade. Or maybe a lone individual is accepted into the other group. And with every one of these contacts comes the invisible exchange. A modern human carrier, feeling perfectly healthy, passes a virus to a Neanderthal. The Neanderthal takes it back to his family. Within a week, most of them are sick. They are too weak to hunt. The children and the elderly die first, then the adults. The few who survive are scarred and weakened. Their social structure is shattered. This happens in one valley. 100 miles away, another Neanderthal group is struggling with a harsh winter. Their food stores are low. A different disease, this time a bacterium, makes its way into their camp from a modern human group that just moved into the region. It causes a severe respiratory illness. In their weakened, malnourished state, they have no chance. The whole group is wiped out. This is not a single dramatic event. It's death by 1,000 cuts. A slow, grinding attrition that happens over 200 generations. It's a plague combined with a climate crisis combined with a resource war. It's a perfect storm. The diseases would have had a cascading effect. They wouldn't just kill. They would also cause chronic illness, reduce fertility, and lead to more miscarriages and stillbirths. A population that is constantly sick cannot thrive, cannot grow. It can only shrink. The modern human populations, with their broader genetic diversity and resistance to these diseases, would have been able to rebound from their own losses much faster. Their populations grew while the Neanderthals withered. The interbreeding, which seems like a story of connection, might have been part of the tragedy. Sex is a very efficient way to transmit diseases. Every act of interbreeding that passed Neanderthal genes into our lineage could have been an act that passed a deadly modern human pathogen into theirs. So, could a prehistoric pandemic have killed the Neanderthals? The answer is probably not on its own. It wasn't a single Neanderthal plague that swept the continent. It was likely a whole suite of what scientists call anthropogenic diseases, human diseases transferred from one human population to another. These diseases were the invisible weapon we carried. We didn't even know we had it. They were the silent partner to our expanding territory in growing numbers. They acted as a biological vanguard, weakening and clearing the path for our expansion. The extinction of the Neanderthals was likely a multifactorial event. They were squeezed from all sides. The climate was beating down on them. Our ancestors were outcompeting them. And all the while, an army of invisible microbes was eating away at them from the inside. They were caught in a vise, and the pressure just kept tightening. Any one of these factors alone might not have been enough to finish them off. They had survived climate change before, they had likely encountered other hominin groups before, but all three together, it was too much. The final picture is not one of heroic conquest by our ancestors. It's a more complex and somber tale. It's a story of a resilient, intelligent people who were simply dealt a terrible hand. They were immunologically unlucky, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, when a new type of human, carrying a new set of germs, arrived on their doorstep. Their story serves as a profound reminder of the power of disease in shaping the course of history and evolution. And it reminds us that our own success as a species was not guaranteed. It came at a cost. Part of that cost was the disappearance of our closest human relatives. We are the last humans standing, not just because we were clever or adaptable, but perhaps because we had the right germs and the right immune system. We survived. They did not. And inside the DNA of billions of people today, we still carry the faint genetic echo of that ancient fatal encounter. Their ghosts are part of us.